Hey, all right. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is the 9th of April, and we're getting ready. Sorry. And we're getting ready for Parshas Tzav. But today we're not going to speak about Parshas Tzav because there's something on our horizons which perhaps may be occupying more time for us than Parshas Tzav, and that is Pesach. Pesach is just around the corner. And with Pesach just around the corner, I thought I would share with you something that is Pesach themed. So, what we're going to look at today is something which comes up every single year on Pesach. It's not limited just to Pesach. It involves the whole story of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, because we know that one of the foundational aspects of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is the story of the Makos, the plagues that the Egyptians were smitten with. If I were to ask anybody, and all of us have been at many Pesach Sidarim in our lives, to rattle off the 10 Makos, I bet we could all do it in a jiffy because of all the songs that we've sang at our Pesach Seders and everything that we've done. So when I ask everyone, what was the second Makkah? We all respond, we know there was Dam, and then Svardeya. And if I ask you, what was Svardeya? I think we all respond frogs. What we're going to see this morning is that there actually was a dispute amongst some of our earliest Torah Mefarshim. What was Svardeya? Yes, the consensus that it was arrived at was frogs, but there was a very strong case also made for crocodiles, and we're going to see about that. Yeah, we're so we're going to see that this goes way back, and there are some very compelling arguments to be made. And in the course of doing this, I'm going to share with you an incredible, little known piece of Jewish history I stumbled on when I was looking into this. It's sad, but it's important that we all know this. So let's see. Here's just something which relates to this. A number of years ago, I don't remember how, but I found this biography. It was an autobiography. It was called "With a Sitter and a Salami," and it was written by retired U.S. Army chaplain Rabbi Alan Greenspan. Rabbi Greenspan has a son who is a very prolific writer, Rabbi Dr. Ari Greenspan. You see oftentimes articles of him and his partner in crime, so to say. There's two Aris. There's Rabbi Dr. Ari Zivotofsky and this Ari Greenspan. They write a lot of these halachic adventure articles where they go just to research someplace, like the whole about in Timbuktu. There was like the last Jew over there. They write very often in Mishpacha. You'll find in other articles and other websites. Their articles are fascinating. You see sometimes in the OU magazine. The two of them are fascinating. So anyhow, that Rabbi Dr. Ari Greenspan, this is his dad. His dad was a chaplain for many years. He's a frum man, was a chaplain for many years in the U.S. Army. And when he retired, he moved to Israel. I don't know if he's still alive. I have to look into that. But he wrote a book called With a Sitter and a Salami, which was a great book, his memoirs of a life as a U.S. Army chaplain and where it took him. So he actually served in combat zones. He was in the Vietnam War. He had so it just again nothing to do with Svardeya, but just something I can't not mention this. I found this so eye-opening. He said that, we're all familiar with the concept that items get stolen and end up in the black market. So during the Vietnam War, this was prolific, and weapons were stolen, equipment, uniforms, clothing, everything was getting stolen. The biggest problem that Rabbi Greenspan had was his order of canned gefilte fish. It never showed up. He couldn't understand. I placed the order, and then people started telling him we were in the black market in Vietnam, in Saigon, and whatever downtown, and we see there's totally stocked up with like cans of Manischewitz gefilte fish. So he basically figured out someone's stealing the gefilte fish, and he said he never understood this, but the Vietnamese were mad for canned gefilte fish, and so someone was stealing it from the base and was selling it on the black market. So he had to send people back to buy it off them so he could have it at his Sidarim, so he could have, for the Jewish soldiers, he could have canned gefilte fish for that. So never would have guessed this. But I know they're very into fish in their diet, but gefilte fish, apparently they were just bonkers for gefilte fish. Yeah, right. It's not good. The gefilte fish is not native to Vietnam. So no, but it's the gefilte fish is native to, Eastern Europe. It's native to America. It doesn't swim in the rivers of Vietnam, the gefilte fish. So they probably were very enthralled by the gefilte fish. But anyhow, that was it. Anyhow, in this book, after serving in Vietnam, He was stationed for a while in Korea. This is well after the Korean War, but to this day, there's an incredible U.S. Army presence in South Korea. So here's just something that he wrote. He says, as I mentioned, the rainy season, that's the monsoon season, was terribly uncomfortable. The heavens poured forth their water for days on end, with 10 inches of rain being recorded during one 24-hour period. As suddenly as the rain began, so it stopped, and the sun began to shine. During part of the season, sections of Korea became inundated with small frogs. They were everywhere, and it was impossible to drive without crunching them under the wheels of a jeep. They managed to get into buildings, every nook in the compound. It is, as I imagine, the plague of frogs that befell the Egyptians. When the sun came out, the frogs that could not reach the water dehydrated and died within hours. But as the following day's rain began, they were there again in numbers as great as before. So he's experiencing this inundation of frogs, and in his mind, he's saying, I'm seeing Makas Tzfardea. I'm seeing it play itself out. Because we always read about this in books. We learned about it in school, and we spoke about it to Seder. But he says, before my eyes, I'm seeing it play itself out. They were everywhere. Now, that was absolutely fascinating. When I saw that, I couldn't help but think, okay, some of our Rishonim, some of our very early commentators in the Chumash would agree with Rabbi Chaplain Greenspan that, yeah, this is a recreation of Tzfardea. But we're going to see that there were others who would say, no, 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 that Tzfardea was not just a nuisance, it was quite deadly because it was crocodile. So let's see, the Psukim itself never tell us what it was. It just uses the word Tzfardea. So here you are, it's in Parshas Va'era. It says it's in Perek Zion, chapter 7. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, bo el Paro ve'amarta elav, k'amar Hashem shalach sami ve'abduni. Send my people out so they can serve me. Chav Zion, v'mayin atal shalech. If you refuse to send them out, hinei anochi nogef es kol gevulcha b'tzfardiim. I'm going to smite all of your borders with tzfardiim. The translation here says frogs. Now, just so you know, and we've always said this before, every translation is a commentary, right? Because you don't always have an accurate translation of a word. So now you have to say, okay, well, how will I translate that? Choosing how to translate it is a commentary. So whoever this translation here, they're going with the majority opinion that's Tzfardea's frogs. Visharatz hayor, the river is going to swarm with these frogs. Tzfardim, balu bo bebesecha, they're going to come out of the river, come into your homes. V'chadar mishkavcha, they'll come into your bedrooms. Al mitasecha, on your beds. Bebeis avadecha v'amecha, in the house of your servants and all your people. V'tanurecha, in your ovens. Mishar secha, in your mixing bowls. Uvecha ve'amcha v'chol avadecha ya'alu hatzfardim. And these frogs are going to be everywhere throughout your country, throughout you, and all of your people. That is all the Torah tells us about Tzfardea. It doesn't clearly define it. For a definition, we go to our Mefarshim, and that's on page 2. You'll see that the Ibn Ezra, one of our most famous Rishonim, he tells us right off the bat that there was a difference of opinion about what it was. And he's going to introduce us to a word in Arabic. He says, V'hamefarshim nechlaku b'milas hatzfardim. Commentators way before me. Now, again, here's Ibn Ezra. He's living more than about 1,000 years ago. So he's living in the age of the Rishonim. He's saying way before me, there's been a dispute raging. What does the word Sfardim mean? Rabim Amru, many say, Shehu min dug, it is a type of aquatic creature, Nimsa b'Mitzrayim, that can be found in Egypt. Yukra b'Lashon Arav, and in Arabic, what is this creature called? Al-Timsach. The al-timsach is a creature that's an Arabic word. If you look it up online, how do you say crocodile in Arabic? It is the al-timsach. That's what you can hit on Google where it says pronounce it for you, and that's how it comes up. The al-timsach. That's how you say crocodile in Arabic, and that's what I find it fascinating. Here is 1,000 years ago, the language, it's the same word. V'yotze, now he describes it. V'yotze mina nahar. Every now and then, this crocodile, this creature, comes out of the river. V'chotef b'nei adam, and it snatches people. Meaning, it's got these enormous jaws, and it attacks people. V'acherim amru. Now, remember, he started off Rabim. He says many. It's not a single opinion. Many say it's the crocodile. V'acherim amru. Others define it differently. It's a common creature that you'll find in rivers all over the world, and they make a lot of noise. For all things considered, I think that's the more correct opinion. And it's a creature that's very well known. He's talking about the frog, something which makes a lot of noise. Now, you see here that the Ibn Ezra is bringing down that a dispute existed way before his time about how do you translate Sfardeya. And he says, some say it is the that is the crocodile. Some say it is the frog. And he says he sides with the frog. History seems to side with the frog as well, because that's how it's always translated. However, again, it's important that we're all aware there are some opinions that say it was a crocodile. Let's just see here. This is an article that appeared several years ago in Jewish Bible Quarterly. And here it's by Rabbi Dr. Natan Slifkin. He's got a museum of biblical archaeology. Is that what it is? Biblical zoology, I think. And it's right outside your hometown in Beit Shemesh, right outside. And it's growing every a couple times a year. I'll get an update from them, new exhibits that they have. I've never been there yet, but they say kids love it. They say kids love it. Adults love it too. All right. So let's see. This was from an article he wrote. We're just going to see part of it. He says the second plague to befall Egypt was that of Tzfardeia. It's widely believed the term Tzfardeia refers to frogs, but Ibn Ezra notes that there are actually two views. He quotes our Ibn Ezra. Next paragraph. The former explanation, meaning the Al-Timsa, that's referring to the crocodile, is regarded as a fish, even though it's a reptile, because the Torah concept of fish also includes other aquatic creatures. Support for this identification is advanced from the description of how the plague ceased. The Medrash HaGadol, I'm sorry, I lost the spot, comments on the statement of the Tzfardim will remain in the river. So he's quoting a medrash here that says that Tzfardim shall retreat from you and your courtiers and your people. They shall remain only in the Nile. Rabbi Yitzchak said they are still deadly beasts. There are still deadly beasts in it that emerge and kill people every year. Moses did not pray for the Tzfardim to be wiped out, only they should not harm Paro. As it said, and Moshe cried out to the Lord in the manner of Tzfardim, which inflicted upon him. So you clearly see from the Medrash is understanding this Tzfardim was not just an annoying creature that made noise, it was not just something gross and slimy, but it was deadly. So if you have to say, well, what fits the bill? If you're learning Tzfardim was deadly, is that a frog or a crocodile? Crocodile fits the bill a lot better. Next one, he says, Rabbeinu Bachia, another Rishon, elaborates at greater length. Moses' word in his prayer remained true for that time and for all generations. In accordance with his words, they shall remain only in the Nile. To this very day, the creeping water creature, known as the Al-Timsa, again, he's using that Arabic word for crocodile, we're on top of page 3, remains there. There it lives. And it is said that sometimes it comes out of the Nile where it lives, rising onto the river's edge, swallowing whatever it finds, even 2 or 3 humans at a time. Neither spear nor arrow can overcome its body unless aimed for its belly, because that's the crocodile's soft spot. Physicians, meaning scientists of his time, say it is venomous. Again, which we know crocodiles are not venomous, but Rabbeinu Bachia never wanted to get too close to a crocodile and ask him any questions. But this is what scientists at the time were proposing. And again, in Spain, they probably didn't have, where he lived, they didn't have crocodiles. So they're relying on, word of mouth coming from where, again, they didn't have National Geographic. So he says at that time, they were saying it's venomous and that touching its body, even after its death, is harmful to man. It is of this Tzfardeia type, and from the power of Moses' word, this creature remains there. This is also how Rabbeinu Hananel explained it regarding this, and speak of all his wonders. So again, Rabbeinu Bachia is also on Team Crocodile for Tzfardeia. Let's see the next paragraph. According to the second identification, which is preferred by Ibn Ezra, that it's a frog, the Tzfardeia is a commonly found animal that makes a croaking sound, the frog. This is also the explanation preferred by others. Some say it looks like a fish, that it is a timsa, which moves its upper jaw, unlike all lowly creatures, and it seizes humans and animals. Again, he's quoting another Rishon. The correct explanation is that they're well-known creatures of rivers, pools, meaning frogs. So he is quoting, this next source quotes from the Sefer HaMivchar, quotes that, okay, there are some that say it's a crocodile, but he sides with the frog, just like Ibn Ezra. Next one, we find the following evaluation in Sefer HaToda'ah. He says as follows: this type of destructive Tzfardeia did not previously exist in the Nile since it was created. It remains in the Egyptian river forever. It grows in the Nile to a great size and damages and swallows creatures large and small. It is the Tamsa, which is found in the Nile until today as a memorial to that plague. And there are some commentaries which say that Tzfardeia referred to here as the small croaking creature. So it appears from the words of our rabbis in the Medrash. So he says the Midrashim to which he refers describe the frog as a small and weak animal preyed on by snakes and aquatic creatures. That's extremely vocal. This description can only match the frog, does not fit the crocodile at all. So again, you're seeing that there are commentators on both sides, and like Ibn Ezra, who sided with frogs, these others do as well. And then we'll just see the last 2 paragraphs in conclusion. Well, there are those who have taken Sfardei of Egypt to refer to the crocodile. Its usage in midrashic sources and etymology indicate the frog is the more likely contender, as several of the commentaries conclude. Some suggest the term Sfardea refers to amphibious reptiles in general and could thereby include both frogs and crocodiles. This is explanation given by Nitziv, who states that whereas most of Egypt was plagued only by frogs, Paro and his entourage were attacked by crocodiles. That's interesting how the Nitziv learns. There are, however, factors mitigating against Sfardea being seen as a crocodile. The Torah clearly indicates Sfardea was quite troublesome to the Egyptians, but never posed a threat to their lives. Crocodiles would not be able to enter your ovens and kneading bowls. That's another reason. So, notice again, the Torah doesn't indicate that there was a death threat. It says that it was incredible hassle. You don't find Paro screaming to Moshe saying, "Get them out of here! They're killing us, ripping us limb from limb." So that would indicate it's not a crocodile. Also, again, he said it's going to enter your ovens and your mixing bowls. That means it's a small creature. A crocodile is kind of big for that. And according to Gesenius, again, this is, I think, one of the Greek doctors, the term Tzfardea denotes leaping in the marsh, which is unquestionably a frog. Okay, so we see that we have early Jewish sources taking both sides, and he says the consensus is that it was the frog. I want to share with you one more of our early commentators. Here's Abarbanel. Abarbanel is that interesting time span. He's kind of, they're not exactly sure where to group him. He's just after the Rishonim, but very, very early to be called an Achron. So he's always seen as one of the early Achronim. And it's very hard to know. A time period. Yeah. So he's usually seen as a very early Achron. He's not usually seen as a Rishon there. So again, here he is, the Abarbanel. There's a brief bio on him there. Abarbanel wrote to this day, he's famous for his commentary he wrote to Tanakh, both to Chumash and to Nevi'im and Ksuvim. I'm going to share with you in his first paragraph there, he's going to make a compelling argument why it's the crocodile. And in the second paragraph, he's going to give us a piece of Jewish history that until I saw this, just I was not fully aware of. Let's see. First paragraph. He says, based on what I've just showed you in the Chumash, this seems to indicate Tzfardea is not the small little annoying frog, because he's going to make the argument if the Torah calls it a magefa doesn't just mean something that's annoying. Magefa means something that's life-threatening. So he's going to say this plague of Tzfardea was life-threatening. Frogs aren't life-threatening. They're annoying and they're gross, but they're not life-threatening. Life-threatening connotes a crocodile. So he's going to say, this seems to indicate that it is not the frog. Ela hatanina gadol, it's this incredibly large serpent. Hayami, a sea creature. Hanikra al-timsah, which is called al-timsah in Arabic. Shu bitmunas tanin. It seems to be like a giant serpent. Umaniya halachia elyon, it could lift its upper jaw. V'hu achlon gadol, and it is incredibly ravenous, devouring creature. Yochal egla achas, it can take down and eat an entire calf. O narechad, or a young human. Kulo, in its entirety. Ve'ela tzfardim yotzim minailos, az levakesh ochel nafsham. And he says that this makes perfect sense. They usually did not leave the Nile, but because of the first plague, which was dam, the blood that caused the fish to die, so now the crocodiles lost their diet, so they're hungry. They've got to go up onto land to eat, and that's when they start attacking animals and then people. That's what he's going to say. God works this out in a logical sequence. He says, Elo Tzfardim, these killer Tzfardim, Yotzim Nilos, they left the Nile, specifically at that point, Levakesh Ochel Nafsham, to find food to eat. Shemipnei Ba'oshes Hayar, since the river had rotted from the blood, Lo Hayu Yichom Lisparnes Me'adagim, they couldn't feed themselves from the fish, which are normally found in the river. Because there's these rotten dead fish now floating in the blood. Therefore the crocodiles had to leave the river to go onto the dry land, in order to get a bite to eat. And till this very day, till this very day, Abarbanel writes, in the 1400s, 1500s, every so often it happens that these killer crocodiles do leave the Nile, El Asafet, to the immediate banks, litrof teref ba'adam v'ema, to attack people or animals, mayhem, that might be right there on the shore. Ubizman ha'makeh nisrabu ma'od, and at the time of the Makkah, Tzfardeim, there was an abundance of these crocodiles, v'yatzu b'gzeres Hashem, and they left the Nile because it was the decree of God, v'nichnasu b'kol gvul, and they went throughout the borders of Egypt. And they were eating all the domesticated animals they could get. And that's why God says, I am going to smite all of your borders, and those who were they would even go further from the river. They would enter people's homes, into their rooms, al mishkavim, even into their beds, because they were looking for kids, because they couldn't fight them off. They couldn't flee, and they would attack. So the Abarbanel's view of what Makas Fardea was a more gruesome one with these crocodiles. Okay. Now all of a sudden he throws something at us that just, I saw this and I was like, wow, what is he talking about? Let's see this next paragraph. V'hayom, he says, today, Abarbanel saying, not ancient history, my lifetime. V'hayom, today, noda I miyusheves, me'anshe Sfarad. It is well known that there is an inhabited island that is inhabited from people who were originally from Spain, Mimalchus, Portugal. They were originally from Spain, then they were in Portugal, and then they ended up on this island. Ushma, and the name of this island, Nikra I Hatim Sachim, the Isle of Crocodiles. Lefi Shehem Yotzim Shama, because they come out into this island, Minayam, from the sea. They're saltwater crocodiles. V'nichnasim be'i, and they go into the island, Litrof Teref. They go into this island to attack and to get food. Lechol, to eat. V'anshe ha'i, and the people of this island, Lo chamimimem, they make war with them. Becherev v'chanis, they use swords and spears. B'makavos, and they use daggers, v'garzen, and battle axes. V'hema yu ochlin rova yiladim, and these crocodiles were successful in eating most of the children on this island, Shalan She'ai, of the inhabitants of this island. V'ata, and now, Kasher Archu Shama Yamim, since so much time has gone by and the people on this island have figured out how to fight these crocodiles, Gershum B'tachbuloseim, they've been successful at chasing the crocodiles away, using all sorts of traps, uvikli zainam, and weaponry, mivo b'toch, and now they no longer come deep into the island. Avol yotzim min hayam el hasafa hasmucha belvad, but they still will come out of the sea and they will get on the shoreline. They will attack. V'rabim meyaldei ha'ivriim, and you should know that there are many Jewish children migorshe Sfarad who were expelled from Spain. He'enisam melech Portugal, the king of Portugal forced them la'avor al dato, to violate his laws, shalachotam, and then he forcibly sent them, shama, to that island, ze yadalad shanim, more than 14 years ago. Fulam yaladim, those exiled children were all young babes. Asher ein b'hem kol mum, there was nothing wrong with them. They were wholesome kids. Zecharim v'nekevos, both boys and girls. Yoser me alpayim nefashos, more than 2,000 Jewish children. He doesn't give us the whole story. More than 2,000 Jewish children were originally from Spanish Jews in Portugal. The Portuguese king forced them to break the law, and then he sent them to this island. Ukvar paruva rabu sham. The inhabitants of this island have multiplied there. Virova I, and he says most of this island at this point, miyusheves mehem, are the inhabitants of this island are now descendants of those 2,000 children that were exiled there. Ve'iyazos, and this island, where is it? Hinetuya me'akava shavemat. It's very close to the equator. So he's telling us some horrible piece of Jewish history here, and he's not giving us enough details. But here are the points that he's giving us. He's giving us these points of Jewish history that in his lifetime, he says about 14 years ago, he's saying that some massive tragedy occurred. 2,000 Jewish children were ripped away from their parents. These were children of Spanish Jews who had been expelled from Spain, ended up in Portugal. The Portuguese king forced them to break some law, and now he sent them to this island. They were attacked horribly by crocodiles. Those who survived multiplied, and now the island is mostly made up of their descendants. What on earth is he talking about? So I started doing some research, and I found out that there is a horrible piece of our people's history that we just don't know much about. Here's this short piece of it. Spanish expulsion occurs in 1492. What happens in 1492? The king and queen in Spain decide that they don't want anyone living in their kingdom who's not Catholic. So the deadline was Tisha B'Av that year. They give everyone the choice. You can stay, but if you're going to stay, you've got to convert and you've got to be Catholic. Or you can leave. Leaving is not easy, pick up and go. And there was massive penalties, laws about what they could take with them, how little of their possessions, what they could sell off, what they couldn't. It was going to be basically a life of ruin and starting all over again somewhere else. And an incredible number of Jews decided, we're going to do that. We're not selling out. We're not going to convert. There were other Jews who said, you know what? We also are going to remain loyal to Judaism, but we're going to fake convert. They become known as anusim. Anusim literally means those who were compelled to convert. The Spanish derogatory nickname for them was marranos, which was another name for swine, that they were the new Christians who were basically being called swine. That tells you how much love they received. They now are subject to the Inquisition. The Inquisition is a church department that is formed to weed out the new Christians who are still practicing the non-Christian faith and beliefs. And if they were caught, they can be burnt, they can be horribly tortured to confess and then burnt at the stake. So the only people subject to the Inquisition are new Christians, people who had converted. Those who left Spain, their lives were ruined because they couldn't take their stuff with them. They had to start all over again, but they were not subject to the Inquisition. That's what happens in 1492. So you've got basically three camps. You got Jews who say, we are proud Jews, we're leaving, and they incredible Mesiras Nefesh, they gave up everything. You've got Jews who threw it all away and convert and say, we're going to start new lives as Christians. And you got a small group of conversos, of those who are going to try to live life in secret like that. A huge amount of those Jews who left Spain were as proud Jews. They go next door. Portugal is right next door. And that's only a temporary stopover because very soon Portugal does the same thing. Portugal gives them the same choice. The king and queen of Portugal say, we want to have a purely Catholic country, and they give them the same choice. So there were many Jews who were strong enough to give it all up once, said, we can't go through this again. So there were far more anusim, marranos in Portugal than they say that there were in Spain. To the point, I met some college kid years ago who was in America on a work visa, and he was telling, he wanted to get together for coffee. He told me he's Portuguese, and he said in his town where he came from, there's kind of like a secret handshake, wink, wink, what they all say, we're all descendants of conversos. And so he said, like, there's certain last names that are kind of like Cohen and Schwartz over there, that if you hear those last names, everyone knows those are descendants of conversos. Fascinating. And he said there's a huge chunk of them that are in the process of trying to reclaim their Jewish identity. It's 500 years later. There's no reason to hide. And a lot of them are working with organizations in Israel to try to reclaim their Jewish identity. And they would probably have to convert because he says it's impossible to prove that for the last 500 years, every mom in the line has been Jewish. So just to be on the safe side, they'll get a conversion. But he said there are a lot of Portuguese who are in the process of returning to the faith now. Absolutely fascinating. He started naming me different celebrities. I didn't recognize them because I'm not familiar with Portuguese culture. He started telling me that there's tons of very high prominent people in society. It's just well known. They're descendants of Marranos. Like I said, I had no idea this. Anyhow, that's what happened. We're going to see, though, that something tragic at that same time that this is happening. Portugal, it's hard for us to imagine Spain as a world power, but once Spain was a dominating world power, it had Spanish Empire. Portugal also, and they conquered new lands and made colonies. Well, when you have a colony and you want to colonize it, now we got a little problem. I'm gonna just jump forward a little bit just to show you where this is, and then we'll come back to something. Okay, let's jump forward a little bit to page 6. I just want to show you something on page 6, and then we'll come back to this. Page 6. In the process of researching this, I found an academic paper that was written by a professor by the name of Norman Sims, and he's at a University of Waikato, I think that's how to pronounce it, and it's in Hamilton, New Zealand. I believe he's a professor of psychology, and I saw that he had an academic paper that was entitled Devoured by Wild Animals, Trauma and Post-Traumatic Stress in the Children of Sao Tome. So here's just the opening paragraph where he basically gives us the history of what Abarbanel is talking about. In 1493, so that's 1 year after the Spanish expulsion, an incredible amount of Jews ended up in Portugal. After the expulsion of Jews from the Catholic kingdoms of Castile and Aragon in Spain, the poorest and probably the most devout of the Sephardim. Why the poorest? Because they couldn't take their wealth with them. Why the most devout? Because they were the proudest Jews who said, we're not going to convert, and they left. So the proudest and probably most devout of the Sephardim who crossed over into Portugal were dealt another terrible blow. Unable to pay the transit tax imposed by the crown, meaning the king, for the privilege of staying temporarily in his realm, these distressed family were made slaves of the king and scattered around the country. Because he basically said, okay, you left Spain, you're now here as refugees. We don't have some program here to make you into citizens. We'll let you stay if you can pay this exorbitant tax. They had no choice. They had to agree to those terms, figuring, okay, we'll come up with the money somehow. Enough time goes by, they can't come up with the money. Now he says, it's my right as king. You are now my slaves. I own you. And as a result of that, I'm going to scatter you around my country wherever I need people. I need some work done. I need roads built here. That's what he's doing to these Sephardim who are so devout and poor that had just left Spain. Okay. Then even worse happened. In order to secure the new island colony of Sao Tome, we'll soon see where that is, which had been uninhabited when discovered a few years earlier, but proved difficult to settle because of the steamy, disease-ridden climate, the king assigned the two captains in charge of Sao Tome, put in charge of developing sugar plantations there to rival those of Madeira, the children of those Jewish families. So he basically seized all these kids now, and he says, I got a plan. We've got this new island colony that I want to make this massive sugar plantation that's going to provide sugar to Portugal. The problem is it's so disease ridden. Whenever we're sending Portuguese over there, they're coming down with diseases and dying. In his 15th century mind, he's thinking, why is that happening? Well, that's because I'm sending them there as adults. If I send them there as children, they'll grow up to it. Their bodies will become acclimated. They'll be able to survive. Where am I going to get children to just send over there? Great idea. I have all these Jewish slaves that I just seized because they couldn't pay the tax. I'll take their kids, I'll remove them from the parents, and I'll send them to Sao Tome. They'll grow up there, they'll be immune from disease, and they will set up to be they will be the ones to work this sugar plantation. That was his plan. So he says there, the idea was to separate the boys and girls from their parents, forcibly baptize them, and ship them to Sao Tome off the western coast of Africa, near Angola and Congo, allow them to grow up immune to the difficult heat and swampy conditions of the island, and to provide the core of an intelligent European population. Now, again, it's a very racist statement. What they're saying is, who's living off the coast of Africa? Africans. And those aren't intelligent. We need intelligent Europeans there. But how am I going to get intelligent European children? No parents are going to give me their kids for this project. Simple. I'll seize the Jewish kids and I'll send them over there. That's what he wants to do, albeit in the first instance, an enslaved one. Go down a little further, there's a map. You see that there's a map of Sao Tome. You see it's in the bottom left over there. It's right off the coast of Africa. That's where you see Sao Tome. To this day, it's there. It's off the coast of Africa. That was what Abarbanel was talking about. Now, just in the interest of time, you can keep this and read it on your own, but I just want to tell you what was on page 4 and 5. On page 4 and 5, this is from a book. I bought this on eBay after I started researching this. This was fascinating. This was a Portuguese converso. This was someone who had grown up. The family had chosen to fake convert to Catholicism, but he was Jewish. He was one of those in Portugal. His name was Samuel Usque. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name, was either Usque or Usque. So Samuel Usque. So he was living in Portugal, and he was one from the Anusim, and he wrote a book in Portuguese originally that it was basically a deadly book. If you got caught with this, the Inquisition could get you. But it was basically to give chizuk, to give strength and encouragement to Jewish people living in Portugal who had decided to be conversos. And it basically was called The Consolation for the Tribulations of Israel. It was basically saying that it's going to get better. But he was recording all of the tsaros that the Jewish people have gone through and trying to give them chizuk that it's going to get better. And if you look in there, in his entry in the year 1493, it's called When My Children Were Sent to the Lizards. And there you'll see there's a 2-page account of him giving, again, he's living after this occurred. He was born in about 1500, so this is in 1493, but he grew up hearing from the Jews in Portugal what had occurred and how their children had been torn away from them, 2,000 kids, and what that was like, the trauma, what that was for their parents who were left behind begging for mercy and how they were ignored. So you'll see 2 pages of that where he's writing about what kind of trauma that was for the Jewish community living in Portugal at the time. This is what the Abarbanel is referring to. Now, I remember once I started reading this, I think I remembered when I was a kid, there was a Jewish novel that, like a kid's book. I don't remember who the publisher was. It could have been Feldheim. I don't remember if it was Feldheim, but it was a Jewish novel that was out there. It was called something, The Exiles of Crocodile Isle. And it was a historical fiction that was based on this. It was talking about these Jewish kids and what they were doing in this. It was called The Exiles of Crocodile Isle. I remember when I was in high school, I remember the yeshiva, they had an English library. I remember that was there. I can't say I remember anything about the book, but I remember the title caught my attention. That was called The Exiles of Crocodile Island. It's a historical novel that's based on this. But this is real. This is something that happened to our people. And there's more to be said on that. But let's, for the interest of history, quickness rather, let's go a little further. So on the bottom of page 6, this is a website I found called Kulanu. Kulanu is some kind of organization that is out there in Israel, and I believe it's meant trying to assemble all the pieces of the history of the Anusim, of the conversos, both from Spain and from Portugal, and trying to help them reclaim their Jewish history, but also just figure out what exactly happened. So this was on their website. Today he's talking about the islands of Sao Tome and Principe. These are those 2 islands off the coast there, and this is very close to the equator, exactly what Abarbanel was describing. So he says, today these islands of approximately 100,000 inhabitants are independent of Portugal. 2 years ago, Israel's first ambassador, Dr. Moshe Liba, was warmly received. He found that the descendants of the child slaves were still a very distinctive section of the population by their whiter skins. Because, of course, you could see these kids, what was the expression? Mulatto was, you could see like there was a mixed heritage there because they were much lighter. There still is African features and there's pigmentation is different, but they're still much lighter, means that there was some crossbreeding obviously in there. Proud of their historic past and desirous of contact with Jews outside. Whereas they were totally separated from the Jewish world for 500 years, but there are some oral traditions that have been passed down where they were coming from. So they were fascinated that there's this Israeli ambassador who showed up. Some Jewish customs seem to have continued. We're on page 7, although now mixed with heavy Creole society values and culture. In order to commemorate the children who were torn from their parents in the 15th century, an international conference was held to coincide with the island's 20th Independence Day on July 12th, 1995. So you realize that they only became independent of Portugal in 1975. That means that little island was a colony that was still subservient to Portugal until 1975. Participants attended from Israel, the US, France, Holland, Portugal, and Spain. It's hoped that sponsorship will come forward for further research and studies in the area. Inquisition archives that have been closed for hundreds of years, including 571 pages dealing just with Jews in Sao Tome, have now been opened to researchers and are eagerly being awaited at the Institute for Marano Anusim Studies in Gan Yavne, Israel. It's hoped that interested persons will come forward to enable this valuable opportunity to be used. So they actually have the records. The Inquisition kept records, and they're going through them now. They want to find out as much as they can about what happened in Sao Tome. I have not seen those published. I'd be so curious to see what do they have? What are those records? What did those show?
These lines keep records also.
I don't know. The church they documented stuff. They believed they were saving souls, so they were documenting stuff. Now, I want to share with you just where does this take us to nowadays? The closest that I found about that we're going to get to current history. This is a book that I had bought also once I saw this quoted somewhere. So I bought this online for this one article. This woman obviously has done a lot of research into a lot of Jewish fascinating, off the beaten track Jewish historical items. It's called Day Trips to Jewish History by a woman named Libby Astaire. I don't know anything about her. I believe she lives in Israel. She was an Oleb. I don't know anything about her, but she's got, this must be like her collected works, this book. So she has a long article about Sao Tome. That's why I bought this book. And here is the end of it. What happened to the crocodiles of Crocodile Island? Were you to visit Sao Tome today, you might have to share your island getaway with lizards, mosquitoes, and sharks. But one thing you wouldn't have to worry about is crocodiles. So why did Abarbanel write? And today we know of an island whose inhabitants are natives of Sfarad, Spain, and the Kingdom of Portugal, and its name is the Island of Crocodiles. And what about Samuel Usque, who wrote about great lizards that swallowed the children? Were they both deceived by false information? I asked in Sao Tome about the crocodiles and lizards, said Professor Moshe Liba. Again, that was Israel's first ambassador there. The answer he received was, here there are only snakes. So Ambassador Liba didn't find anything that could verify what Abarbanel and Usque are writing about. But Usque and Abarbanel are contemporaries. What were they? They're writing this in their lifetimes. Were they misled? Not content with that answer, which contradicted Jewish sources, Professor Lieber searched for more information. He found it in an article that appeared in a 1975 bulletin published by UNICEF, which said a sailor that arrived at the island in the 15th or 16th centuries wrote of crocodiles in great number, as well as poisonous serpents. The crocodiles are gone, but the serpents continue to be a danger for the plantation workers. So again, in the 15th, 16th century, there was clear documentation in this UNICEF thing that a sailor had wrote about the incredible amount of crocodiles that were dangerous. It seems like by now, by contemporary times, there was no longer a problem. For what that Barbanel wrote about how they basically figured out a way to fight them off, killed them off, and the crocodiles learn after a while not to come inland. But look at her last line. I love this. So for once, the UN agrees that the Jewish version of a story is correct. I thought that was wonderful. I just want to conclude with this: is that what's fascinating, just to see how Hashem runs the world, how things come full circle, is this started coming out news about 10 years ago that Portugal and Spain started offering citizenship to any Jew who could prove that they were of Spanish or Portuguese descent and their ancestors had to leave because of the expulsion. Basically, the economies in Spain and Portugal are not exactly word dominating forces anymore. And this has been his story really throughout Jewish history of any land that has kicked Jews out and mistreated them. It didn't take too long for their fortunes to fall apart because we're a huge resource for every nation in which we live. And when they kicked out the Jews, then usually economic problems will follow as well. And that has clearly happened in Spain and Portugal. In fact, they've got a lot more problems because their whole population is shot. They don't have enough positive population growth. They're very nervous about how they're going to be paying for all their socialized programs that they offer their citizens. There's been a lot of immigrants who have come in from African countries over the last number of years. The whole concept of Spanish and Portugal being able self-sustaining is really at risk. So one idea that they had was, let's offer citizenship to Sephardic Jews, and hopefully that'll bring back investment, tourism, whatever, vacation, whatever that might be. So a lot of Jews in Israel have taken them up on this just because they wanted a European passport. Your easiest way to become a member of the EU was to now apply through Portugal and Spain. If you have Sephardic families who can prove this, that's it. So I just find that incredibly ironic how things have come full circle. Here's Spain and Portugal who kicked that Jews out, and if they chose to stay, made them make a horrible decision, seize their kids, take them away, and now they're basically desperate, saying we need help, so we're willing to offer citizenship back. Just it's amazing to see how things go full circle. Yes.
Didn't Spain help Jews during the war?
Which war?
World War II?
I'm not 100% sure about that. I can't say I know enough about that topic. Sounds familiar, but I can't say I know enough.
Book, historical novel about people escaping, going
Could be.
to
Yeah, I just don't know enough right now to tell you one way or the other. All right, the last thing I just want to include, and we'll end with this. Look at that pasuk on the bottom. We say on the bottom, this is what we say every month at Rosh Chodesh Benching, and Birchas HaChodesh and Shul, when we say the Molad, the beginning of a new lunar cycle is coming, we say, Misha Asanisim Lavasenu, God who did miracles for our ancestors. V'golo Samei Avdus L'Cherus, he redeemed them from slavery to freedom. Hu Yigalo Sarav Karov, he should redeem all of us as soon as possible. V'kabetz Nidachenu Me'arba Kanfos Aretz, and he should gather all of our castaway, scattered people from all four corners of the world. Chaverim Kol Yisrael, we're all family, V'nomar Amen, let us say Amen. And I can't help but think of it, because when you read episodes of Jewish history like this, you think, how many Jews are lost out there? How many, when Mashiach comes, there's going to be we think we're this tiny little people now, but when he really starts holding the spotlight and see who's got the Jewish mom, who's got the descent, and we're going to find out. And then you read about stories like this about Spain, Portugal, how many Jews are lost, swallowed up in there, and Nebuch, these kids who are at Sao Tome, whatever happened with them. we can rest assured is what we daven for, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be mekabetz nidchenu me'arba kanfos haaretz, bring in our dispersed from all four corners of the world. He's done this before. He's redeemed us before. May God willing, may He do it again very soon. We're in Nisan, the Chodesh HaGeula, the month of redemption. May we see all of our prayers for redemption answered as soon as possible. And with that, I want to wish everyone who's here and everyone who's online, I want to wish you a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Have a wonderful, wonderful Pesach. At this point, I'm going to stop the recording.